Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring this complex world of clean energy and electric vehicles and critical minerals.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, so we're going to be kind of taking a look at how all these industries are kind of like interconnected
Hmm.
and how climate change risk might affect their financial performance.
Okay.
So our main source today is a recent academic research paper, and they use this pretty sophisticated model to analyze these relationships.
Okay.
And it's especially relevant, right now,
Right.
given like how fast these sectors are growing.
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't just about like individual companies.
Right.
It's about understanding the bigger picture of systemic risk.
Right. So we've all heard that saying, like all our eggs in one basket.
Mm.
But what does that actually look like in this case?
Well, think of it this way. If you have a disruption in one area, say the critical minerals needed for electric vehicle batteries,
Right.
that could easily have a ripple effect on the entire EV market. And then even further into clean energy as a whole.
Wow.
They're all so intertwined that a shock to one can uh, send tremors throughout the entire system.
Okay, so there's definitely a risk of things getting shaky if one sector starts to wobble.
Yeah.
The research paper actually highlights how this interconnectedness that
Mhm.
you're talking about, like it isn't constant. It
Right.
like fluctuates with the market.
Yeah,
Did anything stand out in terms of how different market conditions affect this?
definitely. What really jumped out at me was how during periods of extreme volatility,
Okay.
like the COVID-19 pandemic
hmm
or the Russia-Ukraine war, that interconnectedness actually spikes.
So it's almost like the system gets more sensitive during times of stress.
Right.
The paper gives some concrete examples of that.
Exactly. For instance, during the COVID-19 pandemic,
Right.
we saw systemic risk skyrocket across all these sectors.
Wow.
And the same thing happened during the Russia-Ukraine war,
Huh.
even though it seemed unrelated at first glance.
Right, right. Yeah, that really underscores how global events can have these unexpected consequences,
Yeah.
even in areas that might seem insulated.
Mhm.
It makes you think twice about what factors you need to be considering when looking at these markets.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes the need to look beyond just um, the immediate sector you might be interested in.
Right.
Investors need to consider the broader landscape
hmm
and understand how these interconnections can amplify risk,
Right.
especially during those volatile market swings.
So it's not enough to just look at like the performance of a single company
Right.
or even like a single industry.
Exactly.
You need to see the whole web and how everything is connected.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, are all players in this network created equal?
Ooh, good question.
Or are some sectors more influential in transmitting these shocks than others?
That's a really important question.
Yeah.
What we found is that some sectors act as net transmitters of risk, meaning they're more likely to amplify shocks across the system.
Right.
In this case, wind energy and electric vehicle stocks emerged as the key players in that category.
So those are the ones to watch closely. If those sectors start to experience volatility, it's likely to have a ripple effect elsewhere.
Exactly.
Which makes sense when you think about the sheer scale of investment flowing into like electrified transport right now.
Mm-hmm.
Almost half of the $1.1 trillion invested in the global energy transition in 2022.
Wow.
Any instability in that market would inevitably impact clean energy and critical minerals downstream.
Precisely. And on the flip side, we have the net receivers,
Okay.
the ones that are more likely to be impacted by those shocks.
hmm
The research pointed to nuclear energy
Okay.
and critical mineral stocks as being in that category,
Gotcha.
which also makes sense,
Yeah.
considering how much EVs and clean energy technologies depend on those resources.
Right. It all goes back to that statistic about an electric car needing 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that there's a whole chain of dependencies at play here. But speaking of dependencies, we can't ignore the elephant in the room.
Oh, right.
Climate change. That was the driving force behind our deep dive today. And I'm really curious to see how much of a role climate change risks play in all of this.
Right.
The researchers used 4 different types of climate risk measurements:
Okay.
natural disasters, global warming,
Mm-hmm.
international summits, and U.S. climate policy.
Gotcha.
And I have to admit, their findings surprised me.
Oh,
Yeah?
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, this is where the research takes an interesting turn. Despite all the attention given to climate change,
Right.
the link between those risk measures
Hmm.
and the overall systemic risk in this network was relatively weak.
Really? That's unexpected. With all the talk about climate change disrupting industries, you'd think it would have a much bigger impact. Why do you think that is?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
One possible explanation is that long-term investors in the clean energy space
Right.
might be less sensitive to short-term fluctuations
Okay.
caused by climate change news.
Interesting.
Perhaps they see climate-related events as temporary blips
Hmm.
rather than a fundamental threat to the long-term growth of these sectors.
It's like they're looking at the bigger picture
Right.
and not letting like the day-to-day news cycle rattle their confidence.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And this raises some really interesting questions about how investors are actually factoring climate change risks into their decisions.
That's a great point. It's not just about whether climate change is a risk, but how different investors are perceiving
Hmm.
and responding to that risk.
Yeah,
And that can have a huge impact on how these markets behave.
absolutely. It's a complex interplay of perceptions, long-term outlooks, and perhaps even a bit of wishful thinking.
So, if climate change risks aren't the main driver here, what else is shaking up this system? What are the other significant factors we need to be paying attention to?
Well, the research actually points to two other variables that seem to have a much stronger impact on systemic risk than climate change concerns:
Okay.
economic policy uncertainty
Mm,
and stock market volatility.
okay.
Essentially, when those two factors increase,
Right.
so does the interconnectedness of this entire clean energy network.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about the physical risks of climate change, but also about like the policy landscape and the overall mood of the market.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
While we often focus on the very real and pressing physical risks of climate change,
Right.
it's crucial to remember that policy and market sentiment play an equally important role in shaping these sectors.
It makes me think about how during the pandemic, we saw massive government intervention in the economy.
Right.
And there was so much uncertainty about what policies would be put in place and how they would affect businesses.
Yeah.
It's easy to see how that kind of uncertainty could spill over into clean energy and related sectors, even if the policies themselves weren't directly targeted at them.
Exactly. And it's not just about specific policies,
Right.
but also about the overall level of uncertainty surrounding those policies.
Okay.
When businesses and investors are unsure about what the future holds,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to become more risk averse.
Right.
And that can have a cascading effect on investment decisions and market behavior.
So it sounds like these findings give us something actionable to track. If
Mhm.
we see economic policy uncertainty or market volatility rising,
Exactly.
we can anticipate a potential ripple effect across the clean energy network.
That's precisely the point.
Yeah.
This research provides us with valuable insights into the dynamics at play.
Right.
And by understanding these key drivers,
Mm-hmm.
we can be more proactive in managing risk and making informed investment decisions.
It's like having a roadmap that helps us navigate this complex terrain.
Exactly.
Right? We know that climate change risks are a factor, but we also need to pay close attention to these other economic and market forces.
Yes, it's about having a more holistic view of the landscape.
Right.
And it's not to say that climate change risks are irrelevant,
Right.
but rather that they might be playing out over a longer time horizon,
Mm-hmm.
whereas these other factors can have a more immediate and pronounced impact on market dynamics.
It's almost like there's a disconnect between the perceived short-term risks of climate change and the long-term confidence in the growth of these sectors.
Right.
We talked earlier about how long-term investors might be less reactive to climate news, but I'm wondering what could potentially disrupt that long-term confidence.
That's a very insightful question.
Yeah.
It raises a crucial point.
Okay.
While investors might be looking at the big picture and betting on the long-term potential of clean energy,
Right.
there could be certain events or policy shifts that could shake that confidence
Yeah.
and lead to a reassessment of risk.
It makes you wonder, what would it take for those long-term investors to start hitting the brakes? What kind of climate event or policy change would be significant enough to cause a major shift in market sentiment?
That's something worth pondering.
Right.
It's a reminder that even in this age of rapid technological advancement and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
We're still operating within a complex and ever-changing environment.
I suppose it goes back to that idea of interconnectedness.
Right.
Everything is ultimately linked, and even seemingly unrelated events can have ripple effects that we might not fully anticipate.
Yeah.
But perhaps that's also what makes this whole space so fascinating. There's
Yeah.
always something new to learn and explore.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's what makes this research so valuable.
right.
It gives us a framework for understanding those connections
Hmm.
and for making sense of the complex interplay between climate change risks, economic policy market dynamics, and investor sentiment.
So it's not just about having all the information, but also about knowing how to connect the dots and see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to do here today, to equip our listeners with the knowledge and tools to navigate this exciting but challenging landscape.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, and the more we understand these intricate dynamics,
Right.
the better prepared we'll be to make informed decisions and navigate the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways.
Okay.
We started by diving into the world of clean energy electric vehicles and critical minerals, and we saw how these sectors are all interconnected in this intricate web of systemic risk.
And what we found is that while climate change risks are certainly a factor to consider,
Right.
they're playing a relatively smaller role in impacting systemic risk
Yeah.
compared to heavy hitters like economic policy, uncertainty, and market volatility.
But here's the twist. Even though those other factors seem to be driving the bus right now,
Right.
we can't ignore the potential for a game changer.
Exactly. And that's the question I want to leave you with today.
Oh.
If investors are truly taking a long-term view
Mhm.
and not easily swayed by climate headlines,
Right.
what could potentially shift their calculus?
Yeah.
What kind of climate event or policy change would be significant enough to rock their world and cause major shifts in these markets?
It's a fascinating thought experiment.
Yeah,
What would it take to shake the confidence of those who are betting big on the clean energy transition?
right.
What's the tipping point that could make those long-term bets look a little less certain?
Yeah, it really highlights the dynamic nature of this whole space.
Mm-hmm.
There's a delicate balance between like confidence in the long-term vision
Right.
and the potential for unforeseen events to kind of disrupt that vision.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of staying informed,
Right.
critically evaluating information,
Hmm.
and being prepared to adapt to changing circumstances.
It's not about like predicting the future with perfect accuracy,
Right.
but about having like the awareness and
Mhm.
flexibility to navigate whatever comes our way. Exactly. And this is where the power of research and analysis comes in.
Okay.
By understanding these underlying dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
we can make more informed decisions,
Right.
manage risk more effectively,
Right.
and ultimately position ourselves to thrive in this evolving landscape.
It's about seeing the forest ain't the trees.
Yeah.
We need to keep an eye on like the big picture trends,
Right.
like the transition to clean energy,
Mm-hmm.
while also being mindful of those potential disruptions that could shake things up along the way.
Precisely. It's a constant process of learning,
Right.
adapting,
Yeah.
and refining our understanding of how this complex system operates.
Well, it's been a fascinating journey exploring all of this with you today. Thanks for sharing your insights and helping us connect the dots.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy diving into these topics
Yeah.
and uncovering those hidden connections that often go unnoticed.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of clean energy, electric vehicles, and critical minerals. It's a complex and ever-changing landscape, but hopefully we've equipped you with some valuable insights to help you navigate it.
And remember, the most important takeaway is to stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop exploring.
Until next time, keep diving deep.